All right, we're ready to start? All right, my name is Mike Newton. I'm an intellectual property lawyer here, which is a fancy word for somebody who does patent litigation. And I'm going to be the moderator on a panel where we're going to talk about career paths beyond traditional STEM jobs. And I would stand up and talk to you, and I would stand up and also give you some information about all our panelists and tell you what their educational backgrounds are and all that. But I think based on what we're trying to convey to you guys here, we're going to let everybody kind of tell their own story. So I'll start quickly. I went to undergraduate school at University of Texas back in the 80s, and I thought I was going to be a physics professor. And somewhere along the way, I thought about going to medical school, thought about going to law school, made the decision at some point, no, let's stick with physics. Went to graduate school in theoretical physics, and then realized that there's maybe 100 good jobs in the United States to do theoretical physics the way I wanted to do it. And I thought, well, what am I going to do to get a job? And on a whim, I went to law school, and then 20 years later, here I'm talking to you. But the educational experiences I had helped me. I use them every day, and we'll talk a lot more about it. I'm going to let you hear what Mike, or John have to say about their careers and where they went. But suffice it to say, I've always been very happy that I chose the career path that I did, an educational path that I did. It's very hard sitting where you are today to see where your path's going to go. But when you look back, it all kind of makes sense. There is some kind of, if you want to call it, guiding principle. It all flows together in a really nice way. And like I said, the technology and the mathematics and physics education that I got, it helps me regularly think in a clear manner. And I was one of the worst writers you can ever imagine. When I was in high school, I couldn't put a sentence together. Some people still may say that I can't. But I learned to, and I learned to think clearly, at least, in my science education, so that I can at least bullet point something out so it makes sense. Whether I write in good prose or not is still, like I said, questionable. But I at least think clearly based on how I was educated. So with that, I'd like to turn it over a little bit, and for each of the panelists, I asked that they talk a little bit about what did you want to be as a kid growing up? How did that manifest itself when you went to college and your education? And then what have you done in your career? And how has your science education helped you? And then what other things do you think you need that make you successful in your career? So if there are other things you wish you'd studied, I'd like you to comment on that. So we have a father and son team here, so it looks like they have the same name. In some way they almost do. We're calling one Michael today and the other one Mike. And so Michael, if you want to start and just give a little bit of information about yourself.
I graduated from Texas A&M about 3.5 years ago. So it wasn't that long ago that I wasn't sitting kind of where you guys are. I started college, wanted to be a nuclear engineer. I wanted to get into nuclear energy and get United States more push for getting off fossil fuels, and I was really passionate about that. So I chose A&M because it had a great nuclear engineering program. Turns out it's not what I wanted to do. A lot of change, a lot of twists and turns, and I found myself being really passionate about operations and process improvement, making things run cheaper, faster, better, whatever the case may be. So I found myself at Lockheed Martin, where now I work on the F-35 program, the new fighter jet that will replace all others except for the F-22. And I work on configuration management. Basically, I review engineering changes on a daily basis, and I determine how it impacts the cost of sustaining the aircraft over the life cycle of the program. So I get to do kind of both engineering and businessy things on a daily basis. It's pretty cool. I never thought that I'd be sitting here talking about what I went through, how I got here. But life has a funny way of putting things in your path. Like I said, I went through a large change. At one point, I wanted to be a nuclear engineer, and I got into industrial distribution. I was really happy with my choice that I made. There's a lot of need for cross-functionality with engineers who can talk to people and things like that. You find a lot of old school engineers that I work with. They didn't develop some of the social skills that they probably should have at an early age, and some of them it's kind of hard working with, and there's a big need for young engineers, especially at a company like Lockheed Martin. I think they say 60% of the engineering population at Lockheed Martin is due to retire in the next 5 years or something like that. So I mean, there's 15,000 people at Lockheed in Fort Worth alone. There's 15,000 employees there, so a good portion of those are engineers. So it's a good field to be going into, and you know, if I would say anything, I would say take every opportunity you can, learn everything you can while you're in school. It's been tremendously helpful, all my classes. Take every opportunity you can, you know, to learn something new, to gain a new skill, anything you can do to help yourself, to give yourself that extra little bit, to give yourself a chance later on down the road, because you never know when something will come up. So,
You know, I have a quick question for you, and this we'll get to everybody else, but, and I have kids that are in college right now, but how good do you have to be at math to be successful in your view in engineering? And
these days, lately, not really. I mean, you don't really have to be all that good at math, frankly. Most of the stuff that I do is, a lot of the things are computer-based. I mean, especially at high-tech companies, you know, a lot of that is done on computers. It helps, you know, if you can do things in your head quickly, but it's certainly not something that's going to weed you out of being able to do something like that. I mean, when I was in college, I had a couple of professors, calculus professors, who were still really gung-ho about making you work out all the equations and all that stuff using 2 sheets of paper just to do one problem. But I mean, some of those professors, some professors don't care about that anymore. You know, a lot of them, you're doing everything on the calculator, and you actually write out. I actually had a class where you write out the steps that you're typing in as your answer. So when you're writing in your answer, you're saying how you would type it into, it was MATLAB at the time, I don't know if that's something that's still being used, but you type in all the functions into MATLAB, and you actually write down and you print off the sheet of what it was, and that would be our test. So, I mean, a lot of that stuff now it's becoming a little bit transitioning to more skill with technology as opposed to innate ability with math, I guess.
I had a case for MATLAB once, where they were sued by, I can't remember, somebody in Austin. Anyway, so Mike Doherty, why don't you give us a little bit of your background and how you got to where you are? And
yeah, my path's a little bit more tortuous. And so you see that actually that's a good contrast here because father-son, right? So good, not so good. So I started in the what I wanted to really be was a professional soccer player, which back in the 70s was not a particularly wise choice because it doesn't pay that great now, and it paid even worse back then. And it worked really well until I broke my leg, and then so I transferred to school in Canada, so I went to McMaster University in Canada, which is where I'm originally from. So my degree is actually, which qualifies me to be a technology executive at HP, is in anthropology. So I decided, well, if I can't be a professional soccer player, I'll be Indiana Jones. That didn't work out real well either. And I talk about the changes that you take in your career. So how do I apply it? I did take a fair amount of science, and we talked about how the things you learn, you may not necessarily see how it will relate to your life down the road, but it's amazing the things that I've learned and the nature of what I do and interacting with people. I work in technology sales. I lead a team of people that are selling cloud services. So I'm on the very leading edge of compute technology. I understand it. Could I go out and program, the data center, the servers, and get all the middleware and all that? No, but I understand how it works. But more important, I know how people think about it, and so what I learned back then has been very helpful. Plus, interesting enough, in studying anthropology, as we're now in a global society, and look around the room at the diversity here, that the world's becoming much more that way. So I enjoy other cultures, and that's really positioned me well to work with different people from around the world. So a little bit unique path. I did industrial work for years, steel mills, auto plants, and then got into high tech, and have loved every minute of it. It's exciting, and once you find your passion, and it's okay to change course. That's the thing, is that hopefully you'll pick up on that word, and because I remember when interesting, you got father-son here. When Michael called me, that is like, Dad, I can't do nuclear engineering. I don't want to do this. And I said, there's nothing worse than being trapped in a career that you don't enjoy. So if it means taking some risk and taking some chances, from years of doing this, go for it. If you think that's what you're going to be passionate about, give it a shot. You will learn when you leave your comfort zone. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that I've done. I keep reinventing myself. I've done it several times. I've got a few years on everybody in this room, and I'm continuing to reinvent myself and find new careers, new things. I volunteered to take in this cloud position. And for those of you familiar with cloud computing, it's a little bumpy start. But again, that's where you learn. So that's kind of my story.
Yeah, and I would second what you said. I mean, I was in theoretical physics, and I did not grow up in a family of academics. And so in theoretical physics, my roommate, his dad was a professor of classics at University of Texas. His mom was an engineering professor. They didn't own a TV. This kid graduated valedictorian in his high school, didn't even know there was a competition, so it was just a matter of course. Went to MIT, came back, and on the weekends, we'd go to his house and read plays. And we'd reading Euripides and Medea and our Shakespeare, and I'd mispronunciate the words, and they'd go, "Wow, that's an interesting pronunciation. Is that from just sheer ignorance, And I grew up differently. My dad always said, "Are you really cut out to be in academia? You like to watch TV." I said, "I really like college football. I don't want to sit around like bumping a log all day on Saturday, and I'm going to watch college sports." And he, kind of told me, maybe like you were telling Michael, maybe this isn't really where you're supposed to be, but the experience is really helpful in having been on that side of the world and seen people like that. In what I do a lot of times, I work with experts. So I do go to MIT and I'm talking to these professors who are very academic, and I'm saying, we're going to a jury in East Texas, you need to tone it down. We can't have a conversation, about modulation schemes and, e to the minus whatever. They're like, stop, we can't do that. It's not going to be convincing. We need a figure. You need to show me what an exponential curve is. And it's not that people are dumb, they're just educated differently.
But yeah, and to echo what Mike's saying about at HP, we have the exact same situation. So while I wasn't a pure science major, I would recommend going down that field, having a little bit of balance in social sciences and even the humanities. But the world has changed dramatically, and so the opportunities that were afforded to me, I'm not sure would be available, frankly, because there's a lot more competition. It is truly a global marketplace. Our CEO, Meg Whitman, refers to our employee base as kind of an inverted pyramid, and we have this very similar kind of situation. Is many of our technical folks are nearing retirement age, and so that's referred as an inverted pyramid. So we need more young people that have science and technology backgrounds. And if you talk to most of the CEOs of major technology companies, they will all say the same thing, and they've told that President Obama, they've told it to Senate committees, we need these types of programs in order for us to maintain a competitive edge in business, because it's innovation and technology that's kept our standard of living high. If we do not continue to innovate, then we will have a hard time competing. So it's no pressure.
So John, the mics have dominated the conversation. I think it's time for some John to get up and tell us your life story.
All right. I'm originally from Chicago, which is actually was fortuitous for what I became. My parents did not have a whole lot of education. They were wonderful people. I had a happy childhood. They loved me, and they were good people, but they did not have a whole lot of education. So I started having, I would say, a hunger for some of this stuff, and I didn't even know the name of it. I used to sneak in the morning, on Saturday mornings, I used to sneak out of bed, put the TV, we did have a television, small little 14-inch, I think, television, and I'd turn it on real low, and I used to watch Mr. Wizard. And I absolutely loved Mr. Wizard. I mean, I watched it with my mouth open, and I was afraid to blink because I would miss something. As I got a little older, I would take radios apart. I would take clocks apart. Couldn't put them back together again, but I'd take them apart. And I started messing with stuff like that. And an older fellow came by and says, you really should be interested in physics. I had no idea, I had never heard the word physics. We didn't have many books in the house. So my parents, I don't think, knew what the word physics meant. And I went to school and I asked the librarian if there were any books on physics. And she almost fainted. I mean, she sort of said, "We've got one." And she was wonderful, and she got me books and stuff, and they weren't physics books, but I read books on submarines and airplanes and space and the sun and things like that, and I found out I loved it. And what I found is that I had an absolute hunger and a love for it. And that's the absolute number one thing. If you don't love this, don't do it. Believe me, there are easier ways to earn a buck, okay? You gotta love it. You gotta want to do it. I've been doing it for almost 45 years now. It's still fun to go to work, okay? It's still fun. I get up at 5:30 in the morning. I am happy to get up at 5:30 in the morning because it's fun.
Yeah, it's very hard time.
Where's the exit?
All right, and sometimes I'm there 10 o'clock at night, okay? I'm having a good time. And if you don't love it, don't do it. It's awful. I've seen people who are good in the sciences but don't love it, and their lives are miserable. Okay, so number one, you gotta love it. I would disagree, Michael, with you a little bit in terms of the basics of mathematics. I actually used my mathematics, a lot of the mathematics I learned. And yes, MATLAB is a wonderful program. We have several licenses in our company. We use it all the time. We also have some proprietary software we've written, and we use that all the time as well. But the one thing about the basics, about a physics background, a basic background, is that if it isn't already in the book, if there isn't an example problem already written that is about what you want, and all you know is which buttons to press, you're lost. Recently on an optimization program that we're working on, I went back to perturbation theory, which is nuclear physics. Okay, and it turns out that some of the math in perturbation theory is pretty interesting if you want to build an optimizer for risk management. Okay, and we're employing it right now, and that's why I would urge, if you're interested in engineering, take more math than you need to take. Take more physics than you need to take. It'll serve you well. If nothing else, when I was hired by Texas Instruments in the late 60s, I'm old. When I was hired in the late 60s, the reason I was hired was the person said, I want somebody who can think in terms of Maxwell's equations, that's fields, versus Kirchhoff's laws, that's circuits. And on that basis, I was hired. So with the basic basis in physics, I could pretty much read any technical book. And that has served me well over the years. Now, one of the questions you asked, did what I learned in school help me out? Absolutely. In fact, I still use the chain rule in calculus today. All right? It still works. All right. But the stuff that we didn't even have a name for when I was in school is commonplace now. Okay, in the late 80s. So don't think that you have a degree, you're done. You're not. You're barely beginning. You're barely beginning. And if you don't keep it up, if you don't keep learning, you're dead and you're doomed. In the late 80s, we built a GPS receiver that was about the size of a child's lunchbox. It was the smallest GPS receiver around. Prior to that, they weighed about 30 pounds. In that same time frame, there was the very beginnings of a cellular telephone. It was about this big, weighed about 7 pounds. All right? The GPS receiver cost $25,000. The cell phone cost $5,000. There was a computer, Compaq made a computer weighed 20 pounds. It was a compact computer, but it was a luggable computer. It weighed 20
It
pounds.
was called portable. It was in his
That's right.
briefcase.
You can
That
carry it.
was portable.
It was about,
And
it was about that big. So if you think about a portable computer, a GPS receiver, and a telephone, you have something probably in the realm of 40 to 50 pounds when you put them all together. The cost is about that same amount in thousands of dollars. And right now, this does everything, with one exception, it does it better. And it costs about, what, $300-400? Okay, now, with the technology that served us back in 1980 to get this $40,000 worth of stuff, serve us well to do this now? No, it was only because folks kept learning and kept trying and kept doing different things. Okay, so it's only a beginning, but you can never stop learning. I go home every night and try to read something that is nonfiction. Okay, still, I'm trying to learn. Just a few years ago, I learned about Thomas Bayes, who lived 250 years ago, and we've developed some pretty interesting software based on what he said 250 years ago. So there's lots of good stuff out there. So you gotta love it, and you gotta want to keep learning. Otherwise, you'll be obsolete in 5 years if you stay in technology.
Thanks, John. So I want to come back to the point you raised, because I think it's an interesting one on the math issue, because my background is I was always very good at math, but not good at anything technology-wise. So when I broke stuff apart, not only did I break it apart, but there was no way it was going back together. And so I started out as an engineer, and I went in the labs and looked at what they were doing and thought, there's no way. And I also had horrible handwriting, and so somebody told me, hey, why don't you major in physics? And so physics, lots of math, easy to do. But I work a lot with engineers who invent stuff and actually are very prodigious in that area. And when you talk to a lot of them, they're not, I feel like I could crush them at math, quite frankly. I think, oh, I'm better than you. But they're really creative when it comes to figuring out how something works. So a lot of these people grew up on a farm, and because they lived somewhere, in a rural area, when the tractor broke or the hot water thing broke, they knew how to fix things. They actually knew how to do something, and they're very creative people. So part of the reason I brought it up is just to encourage you that if you're not necessarily good at math, it's not the end of the world. I really do believe there is a career in science, in technology, in engineering for people who aren't necessarily stellar at math. That said, I agree with everything John said. You ought to push and push and push and learn it. But one of the best scientists in the world is Einstein. Einstein was unbelievably creative, and he hated mathematics. Now, his level of being bad at math, and a lot of our bad at math. I mean, he worked in Riemannian geometry and all this, but he struggled for a lot of years to understand the mathematics that's the underpinnings of general relativity. And, it wasn't his best subject. The creative aspect of him was. So I think, Mike, you gave a good answer on that.
Well, that's what I wanted to clarify. When I
Right.
said what I said, I wasn't saying that it wasn't important to learn it, but what I was saying is if you're not naturally gifted at it, it doesn't mean that you can't do the job of an engineer. So that's really the
Or
point I was trying to say.
leading technologist. What greater technology icon has existed in the last 20 years than Steve Jobs? I mean, he's reinvented the music industry. I mean, the iPhone. I mean, it just the impact that he's had. And he was more on that creative. You're thinking on that creative side. I mean, the man was truly an icon.
I think the creative and then just perfectionist. I mean, there's
Yeah.
a side of him, and so I had a case with Nokia against Apple, and Nokia has a pretty significant portfolio in the GSM and all the areas you're talking about, and they went way back. They were trading phones back when they were, 80 pounds or whatever they carried in your car. And when you look at what Apple brought to bear, whether they created all the technology, I'm sure most of you, the first time you saw kinetic scrolling on a touchscreen was in an iPhone. But that had existed somewhere for quite some time. But pulling a lot of the elements that he pulled together and different components really was the creative genius that he brought to bear. So whether you actually are a fundamental creator of the technology or somebody who can bring it together in a perfectionist way and something that is, people want to use and can use, and I think there's room for a lot of different types. And Steve Jobs is a good example of that.
If I dovetail on something John said, because we interesting, although I'm probably more on the business side of the technology sector than the pure science side, but John made a couple comments that I would really want to emphasize with you. And I just did a similar kind of session with a group of interns at HP a few weeks ago. He said, when he goes home, he reads something that's nonfiction every night. I do the same thing. Probably might be different types of publications, but the way I look at it is, and my coaching to the team that I just talked to and the coaching I gave you is, you own your future. So if you go to work for a big company, don't expect them to spoon feed you. That's a mistake. It's your future. You should own it, take responsibility for it, and continue to learn, because as he said, you will go obsolete fast. And I've seen it countless times at HP, by the hundreds, even by the thousands. So reinvent yourself, continue to learn, never stop, never ever stop. Stop learning, you start to die.
Yeah, to add on to what my dad said, he's absolutely right. They're not going to spoon feed you just because you come out with an engineering degree. You have to be hungry. There's nothing that my management or leaders of any projects I've worked on have liked more than my willingness to work at something and my hunger to get it done and doing it well. That's one of the things they love most, the managers I've come in contact with, about the younger people they've worked with, is the desire to prove yourself and to learn more. You have to be willing to expand on what you already have. I mean, there's no one right path, and I mean, you got to be ready for whatever comes. I mean, there's sequestration is the thing that's going on right now in the government, and there's a lot of money cutting that's going to be happening on defense budgets. And Lockheed Martin is going to be a large target of that, because the F-35 program is a multi-billion-dollar program. It's a lot of money, a lot of tax money that goes towards that. You have to be, and I feel comfortable with where I am, because I've made sure to take on extra assignments. I like to do lots of things. It's good to get exposure in different areas. Take in every experience you can get, every class you can take, get the most out of it. It's very, very important.
I'm going to ask you, following up on that point, and each of you, to give kind of a concrete example of something you had to learn, which you didn't learn in school, but you had to force yourself to do, and maybe it was a little painful in your career. And I'll give you an example for me. I hated semiconductor physics when I was in school. I just thought, I hate the p-n junctions and all this, and it just seemed like something I'll never use, and who does this? And sure enough, I get my first really big case, and it's a Texas Instruments case. And sure enough, I'm dealing with some charge pump design, and it's getting into the transistor design, and whether it's this type of junction doped this way. And here I was back pulling out those books and having to learn. I finally, when motivated with a case, it actually made a lot more sense, and I talked to experts, and I had to grin and bear it and figure it out. So, and I've had that happen in a number of situations. I mean, I didn't like technology, so I didn't care about modulation schemes. So when someone said QPSK or OFDM, again, I couldn't stand that stuff when I was in graduate school. And sure enough, I ended up doing work for Nokia. And one of my cases is, oh, GMSK, this modulation scheme they're using GSM, what's that? And then at a Qualcomm case, same thing, what's OFDM? And here we go again. So there's numerous examples where I had to learn things where when I was doing it at school, I just didn't want to pay any attention to it. And when it came around a career, I had to learn it, and it turned out to be kind of fun. And now that I know it, I'm like, wow, that was easy, But I remember when I first learned about CDMA, kind of what some people would say is a Qualcomm technology. Again, it seemed very complicated, and just blew past me when I was in school. But when I had to do it for my job, it was a lot easier to learn, and I had to do it. So Michael, maybe you have an example.
It's actually funny when I encounter people at work and they see that, they obviously that I'm younger. Typically people seem to think that I'd be more tech savvy than I actually am, using, tools on the computer and things like that. I'm very good with the basics, but a lot of engineering tools that you might use, like MATLAB and things like that. There's one in particular that they use at Lockheed Martin for a lot of the design things, and it's called CATIA. And I didn't like having to use it because I review engineering changes to the aircraft on a daily basis. I have to use it sometimes, and it's not something that I particularly enjoy doing, but it's something that it's a part of the job description, and I live with it because I know that what I'm doing is ultimately it's a pretty cool job at the end of the day, what I get to do. So just because that one part isn't necessarily the greatest doesn't mean that overall I don't enjoy what I do. So.
Big Mike?
So mine probably easier. So my first career, I mentioned I was in the industrial world, and long story short, I ended up in selling specialty chemicals into very unique kind of applications. And I was the only non-engineer in the sales organization. And I was coming up on, they put us through some pretty rigorous testing because we were working and giving proposals to clients, everything from nuclear engineering facilities, nuclear generating stations to large aluminum mills or whatever. And so I still remember having to sit at the time, newly married, and studying Perry's Handbook of Chemical Engineering on my own, just grinding through it cover to cover in order to, but I was highly motivated because I had to do it. But then the other thing is I saw the practical application of it, which I struggled with in school, I'll just tell you that. I really struggled with that. I couldn't get into it because I didn't understand how I was going to use it. For what, and then I could read it and go, oh, well, I was on that cooling tower. I went and saw that condenser. I understand now the turbines, and then it started to click, and then it became interesting. And so it wasn't nearly as challenging, but the first go, when I picked up the, this massive book full of formulas in chemistry, I was like, oh God, I was so fired. But it worked out okay.
John, how about you?
My first job out of, I was on my way to a PhD in physics, and then Texas, starving, living in a horrible, horrible place up in Michigan. And Texas Instruments offered me more money than I thought was in the whole wide world. So it took about 30 seconds to decide, took the job. And the job involved radar. Because I told you they wanted me interested in fields rather than circuits. I didn't know anything about radar. So I went and got a book called Understanding Microwaves. And I read it on the airplane coming down to Dallas. And on my first day, I had Understanding Microwave book with me, and that's how I started work. The guy I worked for at the time said, just because you haven't done it before is no reason we won't ask you to do it now. Okay? You see all those guys out there. Every one of them thinks they're an expert. Go ask questions. If they won't answer it, we've got a library downstairs. Go look in the library. That was the culture back in the late 60s of Texas Instruments. Now that I'm part of a very, very small company now, that's our culture as well. I recently had a less than pleasant occurrence with an employee, because this particular employee didn't think that we had given this individual sufficient instructions on how to do the job. I thought we hired them because they had a certain level of experience and expertise, and the instructions on how to do the job is, there's a problem over there, go fix it. Okay? When you're a small company, that's often what you get. And some people thrive in that environment, and other people shy away from that environment. If that person didn't know how to solve the problem, well, we've got other employees there, and everybody thinks they're an expert. Go talk to them, or come talk to me, but don't sit there and do nothing. So don't be shocked if some of the first real problems that people pay you for to solve are things you never encountered specifically in school. In fact, be shocked if they are. Okay, it's not going to work that way. So the attitude is, I have the basics. I can read books, I can read technical books, I can ask questions, I can talk to people, and that's what I need to solve a problem. And that's the way I've always worked, and the people who come and work for me that have that attitude generally do all right. And the converse is also true.
Yeah, I think you make a good point about the basics. I think the one thing you learn by going through the science education is that you can actually tackle something that the first day you look at it, you can't figure it out at all. And I don't know if you guys had this, you pick up a chapter in your physics book, or when I was in graduate school, I'd pick up a paper, and I mean, literally, I couldn't even get 2 sentences in and have just no clue what it was about.
The abstract made no sense.
Exactly. And so I'd read the next thing, and then I'd go read a paper on that, and I'd learn a few more vocabulary. And little by little, just a 2-page paper would take me literally a month to really get through and understand. But what you gain from going through that process and figuring it, I started out not understanding anything. 2 months later, by really working my tail off, I did understand what was going on. I'd learned a lot. That confidence carries through, I think, and you know, I can tackle almost any hard problem. You know, give me the CDMA, you know, patent the first time I look at it, I'm not going to understand a word, but I'm going to dig in, I'm going to figure it out. So I think that's a good point. Now, I want to start, and we'll start with John and kind of move this way. Looking back in your education, is there one area where you may have neglected things that you wish you had done a better job, either staying more well-rounded, or like you said, digging in a little more on physics and math, or what's the one thing that you would have done, and not saying you would do it differently, but if you could add or give some advice to folks in the room about?
Yeah, first of all, I would still say, you take more physics than you need and more math than you need. I'll stick with that. And depending on what engineering degree you want to go after. And of course, if it's a physics degree, you should take more math than physics if you want a degree in physics. But having said that, what did I not take that I wish I had taken more of? English. English. Being able to write a coherent sentence, construct a relevant paragraph, tell a compelling story, to be able to communicate. I eventually learned those skills over time, but because I went to Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago, they required 1 year of English, and that's it. That's it. You run your own, more physics, more math, you know, all those things. But yeah, I regret I didn't take more of that. And I insisted, my kids, I said, I don't care what your degree is in, but I insisted, you're going to take more English than you need to take. You're going to take courses where you have to stand up and talk to people. You're going to have to speak coherently. You're going to have to write coherently. And they all can do that, and they're all doing all right. So that would be the one thing.
And I'm going to say John probably stole everybody's thunder as we go down, but I'll let everybody say what they're going to say, but I think you're going to hear a common theme would be my guess.
Well, mine's probably, I would say it's essentially the same thing, but the inverse, meaning I wish I had taken more math. And I tend to take more of the social sciences and the English. So I've been successful in the technology world by understanding the very smart technical people and then being able to tell that story and put it into, and it is, you are telling the story. And I was telling some before there's an author that has a very good book out now called To Sell is Human. And it's not about sales pitches, it's that part of what you have, no matter whatever endeavor you take on, you need to convince other people of your position, whether it be on technology or business proposition, whatever. And the ability to tell that story is important. But I wish I had taken more math so that I'd be able to get to that level of understanding in technology faster.
How about you, Mike?
I took just the right amount of math. Yes. No, you know, I mean, I agree with both of them. And kind of in a different direction, I'll say, is one thing that I was really proud of, and that I really enjoyed also in my time in school was not just in the classroom, though the classroom is obviously the most important part, but also trying to be involved in other ways, in leadership activities at school, but not necessarily in the classroom. Maybe it's taking extra work with the professor or something like that, doing work for them, or being a teacher's assistant or something like that. But the experience that I got doing leadership organizations in school was invaluable for me. I was a counselor for an freshman orientation camp. I started my own student organization, and it was just a fun one. We just went to soccer games, and we all just yelled really loud. It was really simple. But you'd be surprised that doing those kinds of things kind of gives you that, to what they were both saying, is the communication, being able to communicate effectively with people, because no matter what is going on, how tech savvy we get, there will always be people who are doing things, and there will always be people that you have to work with, and if you can't communicate effectively, it makes everybody's job much harder, and you will enjoy your career much more if you are able to communicate effectively with people. Like I said before, there are some very old school engineers who didn't get those social skills, and they didn't care because they didn't think it was important. They said, if I know what I know, then it shouldn't matter, and they're very abrasive and they're not very much fun to talk to. But you know, it's that experience is invaluable. Being able to work with groups, being able to work with other people, it has made my job so much easier. So I would say that that's the one thing that I took away.
Yeah, and I would emphasize just looking at a lot of people in different career paths that have some science, technology, engineering, or math connection. A lot of those people can have that kind of more introverted, quiet personality, and a lot of times what they have to do is the thing they like to do least to succeed is be able to communicate their ideas and sell whatever it is, whether it's your theory, you know, is it Leibniz over Newton's, you know, approach to calculus, whatever it is, you have to be able to sell something and convince others that you're right. And I think a lot like John does, you know, I might do with my kids, hey, you need to know how to write a sentence, you need to know how to communicate. Those are all important skills. And when I was growing up, I hated to read, I hated to write. You know, if I could put an equation quickly, I probably liked math because you didn't have to write much. You know, a few things down on the paper, you were done. It wasn't some long-winded handwriting exercise. But thinking about how all of us answered, I think maybe the point is the things that you don't think you're good at, don't let that be something that leads you to not do that area. Force yourself to kind of stay well-rounded. So if you're poor in English, force yourself to take that extra English class. If you're scared to death to get up and talk in front of a group, say, you know what? I'm going to start a club, or I'm going to start something where I have to get up in front of a group of people, because inevitably, at some point in your career, you know, if you're afraid to get up and talk in front of people, you're going to be put on the spot to get up and talk in front of people. And if you don't like math much, you're going to have to do a fair amount of math. So I think that may be the lesson to take from it. But I think in trying to develop your career, the well-roundedness will matter, the ability to communicate, and then the ability to think back to fundamentals, doing the mathematics, the science, you know, is important. And I don't know how much this happens for you, Michael, but, you know, I was sitting the other day, I had a meeting with a client where, you know, it kind of got slow, and I was thinking about this random number generator case I have, and I thought, can I show that the autocorrelation of this thing, one thing down, is the same? And so I'm out here doing mathematics, you know, and pretty soon someone looks over and I got a couple pages written down there, what are you doing? And I'm trying to see if I can show that there's this mathematical relationship. So just, you know, again, I was using fundamental stuff that I knew, and it matters to a case that I have. So anyway, so thinking about other things, if when you look, and maybe this starts with Michael, but looking forward, what do you think you need to be very successful at the end of your career? So I mean, there's certain things that help you at the start. What are the things that you think and the skill set that you need most to do well and really succeed monetarily at the end of your career?
Well, obviously this is me looking forward as
Right.
opposed to them having already experienced it. But
Right.
I'm actually right now, I'm pursuing going back to school to get my master's in business. I'm going to be starting school in probably August. But the willingness, I think the most important thing is the willingness to keep growing. Like the not being okay with just the everyday, just doing what you have to do to get by. But that willingness, there isn't necessarily one skill I would say that I can think of that's most important. I think they're all important. But it's the willingness to keep learning and to keep adding, and not being okay with just sitting idly by and letting what you have already dictate where you go in the future. There's always going to be opportunities that are going to come your way, and you don't want to miss out on them because you aren't prepared. And so that's kind of the way that I was raised, was to be ready for those opportunities. So I just try to increase my knowledge base, add skills whenever I can. I think that's probably the most valuable thing that I have going forward, is that willingness to learn.
So how about you, Mike? If there is one factor you think is most critical to being successful at the end of your career and rising very high in your field, what would you say it is?
Well, I think the answer is it depends. You know, if you want to move into management or executive management, then you do need to be well-rounded. You have to have a good understanding in the technology field. And But I think the thing, what I would recommend after having a long career and had some level of financial success, but do what you love, the money will follow. And in some jobs it will pay more than others. I recommend this to our kids and others, don't choose a career because of the money, because that will often lead you to a lifestyle that really isn't that fulfilling. It's, John was saying, man, you want to be in a position where it's fun to get up at 5:30 in the morning and stay till 10 o'clock at night or whatever. I promise you that you don't want to be in a job that you don't love for the money, because then you might have that $50,000 SUV and a $400,000 house and a miserable life. So I would be careful. So for me, because I'm getting toward the end of my career, and the irony is that what I'm going to be spending more time on learning is math, because I'm a sailor. And if you're going to sail a long distance on the ocean, you might want to be pretty good at math, because it's really bad to miss the island, because the ocean is a really big place.
Doldrums are bad.
And so navigation's kind of important, and GPS, those are kind of important concepts if you're going to do long distance sailing. So and you want to sail from Europe to the Americas, you will not do it unless you have a pretty good sense of navigation and the technology that goes behind it. So as I get on through the end of my career, that's what I'm going to spend my time doing.
You should also learn to use a sextant.
And with that is, unfortunately, is it becoming a lost art. But you're right, that is on my list, is to get out there and do the noon sightings, and do it the way they did it many, many years ago.
That's right.
So John, what's your take on the question?
Change. Don't accept change. Embrace it. Embrace change. Talked about starting a career versus the end of my career. I did bring a prop today, and I'm going to show it to you guys now. This was about mid-range in my career. This would have been in the mid-80s, early to mid-80s. This was a joke. This was a joke. And at the time, GPS, and I was involved in the early days of GPS, GPS was about the size of a steamer trunk. And it cost about $1 million a copy in the early 80s. There was a man-portable, in quotes, man-portable version of GPS that was out there. And the artist, when he drew it, he actually drew it with a gorilla. That was a joke, because it weighed so darn much, you could barely walk with it. Okay, not only that, but it used to get so hot that it would burn the back of the GI carrying it, so that we put a spacer about that big in it, separating it so that it wouldn't burn him when he walked around with it. At that time, we took an old TI calculator, that's what this is, and drill a hole in it. We put a CB antenna on it, and we said, this is GPS phase 4, man-pack. Okay? And we laughed, because we thought GPS could never, ever, ever be this small. We were wrong. It's smaller. It's smaller and it works better. So what does that tell you? That tells you change. Now that wasn't 100 years ago. That wasn't Thomas Bayes 250 years ago. This was the mid-80s. Okay, so what are we talking about? Maybe 25, 30 years, something like that. Your career will span over 40 years. So you're going to see changes like that inside your career. So if you do not embrace change, forget about accepting it. If you don't embrace it, you're in the wrong field. Go do something else. Okay? And that would be it. That would be my advice.
Okay. If you were in their shoes, looking back, what advice would you give to them now?
Go get a physics degree. I'm sorry.
Mike, how about you?
I think what John said about change is change is coming at us even faster than as we came through our career. So I absolutely agree with that. You have to embrace it, enjoy it, try to find what it is that you love to do and pursue it. Pursue your passion and never let go. just continue to drive towards what it is that, and it's going to be different. And don't let anybody, I know you all got parents, don't let your parents tell you what your passion is. You are the only ones who can figure that out. And if you don't right now, that's okay. Just keep trying, and until you do find it.
How about you, Mike?
I totally agree. I still haven't found it. So I know there at some point, you know, I'll find the one thing that it is that I want to do. In the meantime, I'm keeping myself as open as possible and learning as much as I can. And I don't think I've ever heard somebody put it so well as how John put it, of don't accept change, but embrace it. And that's something that that I wish everybody at Lockheed Martin knew, because it's constantly coming. Things are always changing, and you always have to adapt. And I changed my major once. He was cool with it, so that was good. You have to follow what you know is best, and you know, going back to everything they said, you have to like what you do. So it'll come eventually. Just be ready when it does come.
Just real quick to that point, I have my second boy changed his major 5 times. Okay. It took him a little longer to get through school, but he finally found something he loved, truly, truly loved, and he's good at it now.
Yeah.
And happy.
And happy, yeah, very happy, and successful.
Yeah, and I was with an expert the other day. This guy named Whitfield Diffie, and he came up with the Diffie-Hellman algorithm that's used for public key encryption. And this guy's probably 70 years old, maybe 69, got long hair, beard, and we're thinking, well, will he play well in Texas if we get as our expert? And we said, yeah, he will. But this guy came in, and we're wanting to hand him paper, and he's got his, Apple computer, and he wouldn't accept a lick of paper. And I thought, that's pretty, for his age, it's pretty interesting that he was perfectly happy to have just a fully electronic environment. He said, can you send me that paper electronic? I was like, absolutely. We're thrilled to not have to give you paper. We didn't want to print this stuff out anyway. And some of the best lawyers that I've seen in their later years really do accept the new technology and not afraid of it. I'll see them pull out, back when BlackBerries came, they think, okay, what is this? They learn it. When email came around, they did that. When we got the fancier computers, every bit of it. So, I can remember when I was first trying cases, we'd have these big boards we'd come into court with, and you'd stay up all night, and then the other side would object. That's argumentative. You have to go reprint these big boards, and now, PowerPoint came along, we do that, and now people are trying to find better ways than PowerPoint to communicate quickly. And so there's always a new technology thing that you have to learn. If you're a person that's afraid to do it, even in what I do, you're going to have a tough time. So you just got to be prepared to make that change or accept that change and embrace that change. So I don't know if you guys have any questions. We've done a lot of talking. Does anybody have questions about what we do or how we got to where we are? And we'd be happy to answer those questions. I don't want to put anybody in the spot. Tori, do you have any questions? The English major over there?
Well, I guess if we have I know that we have so many students and I think one of the requirements we may have asked you guys is what is your major? And there's very few of you that just said science ? A lot of you already have a determined path. So if you have someone who's teetering on the edge, if maybe they're a physics major and they're interested in engineering, how did you switch over? Like, how did you even know? Was it that you didn't like what you were doing specifically, or that you saw something that you were interested in? Like, how did you make that change, and how did you break past kind of the uncertainty of it?
It was a combination of both. I'd been doing nuclear engineering for 2 years when I changed my major. It came to a point, I think I was in my 3rd nuclear engineering class, and I couldn't get past the idea. There wasn't a lot of group work. It was mostly, buckle down, do your calculations, work on your own. And I'm not saying that there isn't group work involved with nuclear engineering down the road, but at the time I wanted to work with people. That was always my plan, was to get my degree and then go back to school, get a master's in business, so I could work on getting change implemented at the business side of the engineering aspect. And I sat down with one of my professors, and I told him, I talked to him about what I was thinking, and he said, if you're really just passionate about process improvement, which it sounds like overall that's what you're thinking about, when I was wanting to get us more energy savvy with nuclear engineering, energy and things like that, he said, if you're just worried about process improvement, there's a major that you could go look at right now. He was like, I'll set up an appointment. I went and met with them, I fell in love, and I didn't look back. So, that moment, you might not know, there was about a semester where I wasn't sure what I was gonna do. I had no idea. I didn't necessarily like what I was doing. And when the moment came, I knew that it was there, and I jumped aboard. You just got to be ready for it. So it was a combination of both.
I have a similar story. I teetered back and forth between should I go to medical school, should I do law school, should I continue with physics, and I think as a junior I was trying to decide if I'm going to medical school I need to take organic chemistry, and I really wanted to take a physical chemistry course. So at some point, just on a whim, I said physical chemistry, and I took it, and so I kind of knew medical school was out. But even in graduate school, 3 years in, I was like, oh, what am I going to do? Should I go back and try to take the MCAT and take organic chemistry, or what was the path to get there? And so a lot of times there's uncertainty the whole way. It's very, or maybe not for you guys, for a lot of people, I think it's just hard to know what you want to do. And as long as whatever you're doing well at, and you've got some path thinking, well, how much would it take to divert this way or how much this way, and you kind of see what it is, those avenues are still open. And I had one talking about my dad thinking, what the heck are you doing? When I was switching, he was like, oh, law school, it's on your own nickel and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, so what, I'll figure it out, and did it. So if you feel that sense of uncertainty, I wouldn't be worried. I think almost everybody has that. You're really not sure where your path's going.
Yeah, Tori, I noticed there's something on the program also about maybe it's the next session of mentoring, and that's my only input would be is if you don't have someone, try to find a good mentor. If you're a physics major, John probably be a pretty good mentor. You might want to try to get a hold. But because sometimes the expression "can't see the forest for the trees," it's hard when you're making these decisions that are going to affect the rest of your life. It's nice to have someone that you relate well with, that's been through around the block a few times, that you can talk to, say, hey, here's what I'm thinking, can I bounce some ideas off of you? And let them be that sounding board and test some of your ideas, and let them give you some informal coaching and counseling as to, so I'd recommend, if you don't have a mentor, I'd suggest you try to find one.
For anyone in the group, I just wanted to pose a question. Talk to the students briefly about the challenges that they may face. And I think you've hit a lot of things, but in your career path now, how do you take those challenges? How did you take some of those challenges and turn those into opportunities?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I was always happy to have any kind of money or any kind of job, so I made sure I never had a sense of entitlement. And my parents always told me, to whom much is given, much is expected. So I figured I had been given a lot of opportunities to even be at school where I was, and so I was happy to have the opportunity to get up at 5 in the morning and just say, hey, I've got a job. My grandfather had gone through depression, and he just said, it's not a matter of have to go to work, it's you get to go to work. You got to get that kind of attitude. And I think if you keep that attitude in everything you do and view it as just the opportunity is there and take advantage of it and be serious, so many things open up for you, and things just kind of happen. People push you the right direction, mentors or whatever, but if you go in with kind of Eeyore mentality to work, expect Eeyore type things to happen to you.
Yeah, I would kind of agree with that, and kind of going back to what he said about change. I'm typically the youngest person in the room whenever I'm in my engineering meetings, almost always. And sometimes people look at me as the kid or the young buck or whatever they might call me, and it's just a willingness to learn from them. I would say that you're going to get challenged every day, both in school and in your early career and throughout it. You have to look at those roadblocks as opportunities to do something out of your comfort zone. You learn the most, and I think somebody mentioned it earlier, I don't know if it was John or my dad, but you learn the most when you push yourself out of your comfort zone. You gain the most in those opportunities, and they're scary when you first see them. I'm working on a project right now that it was very overwhelming at first, and now it's a great opportunity because I'm getting a lot of exposure with people who are much higher above me. And because I was willing to volunteer to do this and take on a little extra work, you know, a lot of doors are going to open, a lot of people that I wouldn't have met. And you just have to look at it as opportunities to gain, not as, crap, I got to get up early to go to work, I got to stay late. You know, don't look at it like that. Look at it as an opportunity.
The only thing is when you leave your comfort zone, and if you do it on a regular enough, at some point in your career, you will fail. And I think one of the things that define people who are consistently successful in their career over a 30, 40-year career are the ones that when they do hit a bump and they do fail at something, they don't take that personally. They learn from it and you know, old expression, get back in the saddle and try again, because it's gonna happen. Just prepare yourself for it and don't let it knock you out of the game. Just accept it, take it in stride, and get back at it. And that's hard, but you do have to have a certain amount of resilience.
Challenges are opportunities. If you think a challenge is a challenge, and again, I think you're viewing it the wrong way. My goodness, a challenge is a way to show what you're worth. A challenge is a way to say I'm smarter than the average bear. Okay, so yeah, look for challenges. They are opportunities. And if you really want something that is well defined and well understood and very structured and very stable, you're in the wrong room. You really are, and it's okay. That's not a value judgment. That's not saying you're a bad person if you say, I don't want any of this stuff and I'm leaving right now. That's okay. That is okay. But realize that if you stay in this room, that's what it's going to be. It's going to be change, and it's going to be challenge, and it's going to be crazy, and you're going to start, somebody's going to give you a problem, and you're not going to have a clue how to solve it. Don't be disturbed by that. Take joy in that. That's why you get up in the morning. That's the fun part. We don't have a clue on how to figure this out, but I'll bet you we can figure it out. I'll bet you we can do it. So challenges are opportunities. They're synonymous as far as I'm concerned. The same thing.
Unfortunately, we are out of time, so please help me and join me and thank you.